Hey fellas, and welcome back to Quite with a Y. Yeah, another daily upload. Woo! A lot of y'all might have seen it, but earlier today, PlayStation had their big yearly conference about everything that's coming out. If I remember correctly, this is the first one of this magnitude they've done in a very long time. So going into it, I had maybe not high expectations because I'm used to being let down, but high hopes at least. If you're not familiar with these kind of things, it's basically the replacement for E3. E3 has a special place in my heart because of what it was, but it's kind of dead now, and what it was originally is like all three of the major video game companies would come together and do conferences in the same event, and somebody would win that event. It was like really fun as an outsider. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, E3 had to cancel that one year, and then they never really recovered. And then Jeff Keighley, the guy who made the Game Awards, came in with Summer Games Fest and just kind of filled the market, and they never really got their footing again. Regardless, this is the equivalent of the conference Sony would give at E3, like that they use today. And since y'all have asked me like what I'm looking forward to, I figured I'd give my thoughts on everything that got announced. And, you know, maybe if this does well, doing it for the future announcements that are coming over the summer with the Summer Games Fest this year and the Xbox conference later. I'm going to go in order for the most part. I feel like that's just the simplest way of structuring it. But there are more than a few games that I have very little to say on or have never heard about and not excited for, and I'll probably just acknowledge them while moving on. I'm also skipping a few games if they were just an announcement of a port. They're things I could have like played on PC already that are now on PS5, which I will proceed to not play on PS5. So let's just jump into it, and I'm gonna break my rules from the jump and start this video at the fucking end of the conference. It's kind of pointless to stall out of the Spider-Man 2 stuff. It's the thing I got the most to say about. Going into the conference, I thought Spider-Man was gonna be shown a lot sooner than it was. We ended up getting some 10-20-minute gameplay segment from the actual game. I haven't checked the timestamp, sorry. But I thought that was going to be towards the start of the event. Like, I thought this event was going to be in huge part about Spider-Man and be centered around that because we've seen barely anything about it, and it's coming out this year. After every announcement that wasn't Spider-Man, I got a little sad, but then they ended off strong, so I think it was worth it in the end. When the trailer started, I was almost used to being disappointed, and I didn't think the guy walking around was Spider-Man related, and then I'm like, no way, that's Kraven! Turns out I was wrong. That dude was never even like a Kraven imposter. He was just the guy who got killed by Kraven. He was created to be a generic corpse. From there, they show that Kraven is looking for a new hunting ground, and then we find out that it's New York City, and he's not just hunting Spider-Man, which is his usual MO, but he's also going for like every significant person from the last game that lives in New York, which is interesting. I feel like that has a lot of implications for the plot and like how Kraven will be behaving when he's in the big city. After that like 6-month time skip they have, and Peter just bursts out of that basement in the symbiote suit, I was so happy. For one, the gameplay looks crazy. It has those tentacle effects that like Hermaeus Mora does and Venom does in the movies that I haven't been able to see in modern tech at all. It's just cool to see how animators make do with the idea of a symbiote that can just kind of randomly expand in tendrils. That's like a really pretentious way of saying it looks cool and I like when things look cool. I think it also adds something new to Peter's moveset where he has all these new symbiote abilities that if he was just kind of his base Spider-Man like he was in the first game, he ran the risk of kind of living in Miles' shadow somehow because he has all these cool electricity powers and invisibility, stuff that Pete just doesn't have access to. I think using the symbiote here and actually making it a part of like Pete's moveset was a smart thing. One complaint I have is I hope the HUD is customizable because there was a lot of camera shake in that demo and I would really like to turn that off, as well as it just looked generally cluttered. I can get past clutter, the camera shake is just the main thing for me. We found out we can switch between Spider-Mans like GTA 5 protagonists, which is cool. And from Miles' perspective at least, it seems like stealth has been very much improved, like you have a lot more options. It has like a line launcher from the Arkham games, but you can connect several lines together because you have webs and they stick to random shit. My hope is that the enemies are just a little smarter so that it makes it necessary to use all these tools and that it feels like complete as an experience. I also hope that this entire demo is from like some early game stuff. I remember they gave away the raft scene in the promo material for Spider-Man PS4, like the original one. It didn't ruin that sequence for me by any means, but I just generally prefer to have these demos be early in the game, so it's like once I get past them, I'm dealing with all new stuff that I don't know even what to expect from. And generally speaking, Symbiote Spidey is like my favorite type of storyline to see adapted or iterated on. I think outside of the comics, Spectacular Spider-Man, the animated series, probably did the best job. And seeing it come up around here, this is probably like my best chance at having a banger symbiote storyline in the near future, or for like in something that's well funded. I know Venom's in the MCU now, but I feel like it's gonna take a while to get to his arc, and also I don't know if they'll do it too well. As well as that, it's cool that Miles is around for the Venom arc, because he like never has been, as to the best of my knowledge. Having like a secondary, almost outside apprentice Spider-Man able to reflect on how Pete was before is kind of cool. Like, it gives us an eyes-on how Peter looks outside of his own psyche. I'm definitely nerding out right now because Spider-Man is like my favorite hero, but y'all knew this by now. I'm gonna say potential spoiler warning. I'm really just theory crafting, but this is where I think the series is gonna go, and I'm really interested in it. This series has been super successful, that's without a doubt, and Miles has shown that he can carry a game on his own, either both personality and marketing-wise. Like I mentioned it earlier, but it's very rare for Miles and Peter, at least in the early days of Miles' comics, to be alive at the same time. Like, Spider-Man died, and it was a few months before Miles became Spider-Man himself. I'm wondering if they're setting up this big mentor-mentee relationship because they want to make Peter dying even more dramatic and a kind of passing of the torch. I could see in Spider-Man 3, he's like dead, and then Miles becomes the main character, but also like as competent as Peter, and then they like kick off the next 3 Spider-Man games with that. I have no way of confirming that. That's total speculation, but it's just, I have fun doing that kind of thing. That was all I got for Spider-Man. I know it's probably more than any other game we'll get, but I'm really excited for this one. And before we get into more games, I feel like I need to talk aesthetics. On every single one of these major conferences, PlayStation has these kind of weird themed bumpers that they do with their logo. I think the ones these years were fine. It was like real-life footage of stainless steel cutouts of the controller buttons, but it didn't bother me, but it didn't capture my attention in the way some of the PS3 ads did back in the day. And also, we should talk about what I really wanted that we didn't get. I was watching the conference with some friends, and we had a bingo sheet we were meant to do. The free space was there being no Metal Gear announcements, and if you saw it, then you know how fucking stupid we felt after that. There was no Bloodborne PC port or even a PS5 upgrade announced. Obviously not Bloodborne 2. I haven't beaten that game. The only reason I want it is because I've sunk a few hours into it and really enjoyed it, but the 30 FPS for me, like, honestly, is just, it's hard. I'm sure if I just stuck it out, I'd eventually get used to it, but I don't feel like doing that. So yeah, no Bloodborne. There was a leak that said it would be there, but it wasn't. That's not new. The first game announced was Fair Games. I really only saw the end of the trailer and that it had a QR code, which more or less made me laugh because that's like the funniest shit a game trailer can do. On Helldivers 2, one of the folks I was watching it with said it was a classic series, and I believe I heard the name before. It doesn't look bad by any means. It looks kind of interesting, but it just doesn't immediately appeal to my sensibilities. If I tried it, I might get something out of it, but I have no way of knowing. At least until I play it, and I don't know if I'd go out of my way to play it. Immortals of Avium. This one makes me a little sad, actually. This game has already been announced for some time at this point, and the reason I'm kind of miffed about it is because I really want to believe in the concept of a magic first-person shooter, but I've never seen it gone well. Like, Ghostwire Tokyo is a very, very pretty game to look at, and it has a lot of cool concepts. I've never played it myself, but it sounds like the first-person action leaves a lot to be desired. It's almost like Skyrim syndrome, where there's so much to do in the world, but you're more or less just flailing a stick in front of you for the entire game if you're playing melee. What I've heard is that apparently the weapons don't feel very satisfying to shoot, or they don't have much kickback. You just don't have a lot of feedback from whatever you're using. And this game looks like it plays a tad slower than I feel like it should. Like, this dude's creeping around, walking around the boss he's fighting. I feel like these fantasy-style weapons almost lend themselves more to a boomer shooter approach, or more generally just a movement shooter in general, where half the equation is just maneuvering around shit, and the gunplay isn't all there is to the gameplay. In Call of Duty, it's all about how the guns feel. In Doom, it is absolutely about how the guns feel, but also how well you can, like, maneuver in an arena. This is definitely out of order from when it got announced because it was towards the end, but a huge eyebrow raiser to keep an eye on for me was Marathon by Bungie. If you don't know, Marathon was the first shooter, or maybe even game, that Bungie ever made, and it really set the groundwork for the original Halo games. Seeing them free and able to pursue that with their billions of dollars of Sony money to make Sony products, I am very interested to see how they'll think about it or tweak the formula on the modern day. Ghost Runner 2 looks really cool. I sucked at the first one, and this one also looks cool, but I'll probably never beat it just like the first one. Phantom Blade Zero has such a cool aesthetic, and the combat looks dope. Satisfying parries in games just have me creaming and doing things I didn't know my body was capable of. That said, some of the animation looks stiff, and I'm wondering how it'll translate to game feel. And also, there wasn't any HUD on any of these animations, and it looked like it could have been rendered in an engine, like it could be live gameplay, but we don't know that for sure, and it's hard to tell how it'll feel to actually execute everything that it showed. Sword of the Sea is a flow state game, a genre I've been meaning to actually get into for a while. Like, I see them used as background footage in YouTube videos and under TikTok or Reddit story times a lot. This trailer more or less reminded me that I should look more into those because I've been actively interested and just keep forgetting. In Neva, I think that's how you say it, the animation was cool, but that's all the trailer was, an animation. I have no idea what the game's gonna actually be. It seems like it's aiming for more of an indie darling story thing, but it could be a Souls-like, and and I would have no idea. Cat Quest is a franchise that apparently has like a billion different titles in it, and I've never heard of any of them. I got introduced to a new world because of this one not even 60-second trailer, I think, so that's cool. Foam Stars appears to be Splatoon for non-Switch users. That might seem kind of reductive or like I'm simplifying what the game is a bunch, but I think for this conversation it works. If Splatoon wasn't a Switch exclusive, it would probably be one of the top multiplayer shooter games, and I firmly believe that. Clarify, it is not for me in the slightest, I just don't really have that much interest in it, but Splatoon 3, like on its own, has over 10 million sales just being on the Switch. I wonder if Nintendo was more willing to put their titles onto other consoles, how big it could have been. And it's been proven now that there's an obvious appetite for this kind of Splatoon gameplay, so this other company gets to put it on every other console Nintendo's not at, and they'll probably make bank. It has to actually deliver on what people like about Splatoon, and I have no idea what that is in specific, so I'll leave that to y'all. Plucky Squire is a game I've actually been pretty interested in since its announcement. It's this adventure game that transitions from 3D to 2D graphics depending on the setting. Like, you jump out of a picture book into the real world and become 3D, and then you can go to a different book, it sounds like, and become 2D within the world of that book again. It's just really creative, and I want to see how it pans out. Metal Gear games getting announced for the PlayStation 5. Oh boy. The person who made this original bingo sheet was some dude on Twitter, and I am really wondering how he feels because the free space was there being no Metal Gear announcements at all, and instead we got 3 different games, but all we really had was a cinematic trailer. We didn't get any gameplay, so we don't know if they'll be like super smooth, fingers crossed. I've never played a Metal Gear game, and I've been going back and forth if I should just jump into 5 or replay the series from the beginning and work my way up. This at least gives me an option to do that if I so choose. This next game I'm just going to call Towers because I have no idea how to pronounce the last word in its title. But imagine having to be the game that gets announced after the Metal Gear Solid announcement. It's got to feel like you pissed someone off who was in charge of that kind of thing. The game itself doesn't look bad. In fact, I generally appreciate the idea of skyfish in the sky. Big whales that swim around in the air like they do in the ocean. But it didn't really like grab my interest in a major way. I just think it's that looks neat. I hope it does well. In a very passive sense, it's not for me. Final Fantasy 16 has been announced for a while, but I didn't find this out until a few months ago. The combat director behind Devil May Cry 5 is apparently like working on the combat in this game, so it was an immediate sell for me. I've only ever played Final Fantasy 14, and that's because I heard it was like a really solid MMO, which it is. But it's the idea of getting that level of quality that was in DMC 5, plus all the fucking particle effects in the trailers that has me just enamored with the potential of this game. Square Enix has managed to at least get my money off me to try the game if I don't end up loving it. If that ends up happening, then the marketing team should get a fucking $40 billion raise. They can convince people to buy games that are bad, and they won't even mind because it felt cool to watch the trailer. Alan Wake 2 had already been announced a while ago, but I was excited to see more info on it because I am just legs deep, knee deep into Remedy lore. Remedy are the studio who made Alan Wake and also Control. It makes me want to try and finish the first one finally, which I didn't give up on, but I just randomly stopped playing and never came back to after I died at one section too many times. It's one of those you put it down, I'll pick it up in the morning, and then you never actually pick it up again. This is hopefully the motivator to go back and see that through. I just really loved Control. Like, that is genuinely one of my favorite games from the 2010s. And knowing that Alan Wake is canonically tied into that universe, I'm just really excited to see where it expands out to, and I hope they go deeper on the Control ties in this game. The first Alan Wake was actually a decent amount of action and was just kind of horror and aesthetics. There are definitely scares. I haven't beaten the whole thing, so I can't give you a full picture of it. But from the way they talk about Alan Wake 2, it sounds like it's gonna be like a full survival horror, which is a major change of pace. Alan Wake 1, you had a decent amount of agency. You got plenty of guns, though you had to find ammo. It was a mix of things. I want to beat the first one just so I can see how it feels compared to this one, and also I'm just generally excited for Alan Wake 2. Assassin's Creed Mirage looks like it's gonna be a throwback to the older style of Assassin's Creed games, the ones that were most prevalent in the early 2010s. I want to say like Assassin's Creed 4 and before that. I really haven't played a game in that format in ages. The last one was Rogue, which came out around the same time as Unity did, like 2015. So it's been close to a decade since I've had that kind of classic stealth Assassin's Creed experience, and I really wouldn't be opposed to revisiting it in a new world or something. I don't really expect this game to introduce much new or to innovate in the way that a lot of folks really hope that Assassin's Creed would by this time in its life cycle. I'll at least enjoy a nostalgia romp that's well made if I can. It's specifically targeted at schmucks like me is what I'm trying to say. I fell for the ads. Revenant Hill, I believe, is made by the same people who made Night in the Woods, and I've heard great things about that game, so I'm sure this game has some merit going into it, but I've never played Night in the Woods, so I should probably do that first. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. I have no idea. I've heard the name Grand Blue, and that's about it. To me, this looked like Dragon Quest if it was Genshin. Somebody in the audience definitely felt like they just had been shot because of that comment. Street Fighter 6. You know, this conference made me realize how tight Sony and Capcom were. I kind of always passively do it, like PlayStation would get a lot of goodies on Capcom games that other consoles or platforms wouldn't. It just clicked this time around, and it shows with just how much they were willing to reveal for the first time on this conference. I don't play a lot of fighting games generally, but I'll pick one up if it looks cool, and it's like one of the more mainstream ones. I'm not very creative. Like, I've played Mortal Kombat 9 and enjoyed it. When I see the Mortal Kombat DLC characters, I'm like, huh, that's cool. And I like the direction Street Fighter 6 is going, in that it has like a bigger single player, so there's more to do on your own. God knows I'm not playing online, man. I'd get my ass whooped every day and cry about it. And they're also letting Chun-Li get at least a little bit older as a woman, which is very rare in media. Long-standing media especially, somehow. I'm hoping to see her actively fight as a granny. I really don't have much to say about Ultros or Tower Fantasy, but Dragon's Dogma 2 caught my eye, not because I've ever played it, but because I've had to hear about it a lot. The friends I was watching with have raved about the first one forever, both saying it sucks complete ass in certain ways, but is peak in others, and that you should play it even though despite the dog shit. And seeing that it apparently has enough of a following despite not being like, I don't know, a AAA game to warrant a sequel is motivation enough for me to at least check it out, and I'll probably do that at some point, I hope. Now, this next chunk was entirely PlayStation VR 2 stuff. To be clear, I do not own a PSVR 2, just the original, but a lot of these games will probably end up on PC and may also act as factors if I choose to get a PSVR 2 headset. First game they announced was FNAF Help Wanted 2, which I'm genuinely kind of interested in. The hope is to make lots of money off of this one, I'm sure. To me, Security Breach was a mess. I feel like that game was rushed and Steel Wool was just kind of crunched to get it out before it was ready. It felt like it needed at least another year in the oven, but they had to get it out by a certain time, and you know how those things usually go. And it was a real disappointment how much I didn't really enjoy that game because of how much I really like FNAF VR Help Wanted, the first one. I believe it was the first 3 or 4 FNAF games got converted into VR and kind of revitalized with new animations, and how these things would look like from the first-person perspective of the dude actually sitting in the chair. It brought a lot of life into those games, and because of the static positioning, there was a lot more you could do with presentation, and I think Steel Wool excelled at that. Seems like they're bringing Sister Location to VR this time around, and I'm just really hoping they can recreate that same charm, especially because this is where they shined the most last time, and I just want to see them do well, alright? I don't want Five Nights at Freddy's to be in the hands of a studio who's not good, and so far, I believe that's not the case. Circumstances just not have been great for game development to be good. A VR mode for the Resident Evil 4 remake got announced, which is nuts because Oculus got a original Resident Evil 4 port just exclusively to Oculus headsets, and now apparently you can play like a better looking version of that on the PlayStation. They're gonna be punching the air right now. I still have to play the Resident Evil 4 remake in general, so that'll come with time, but I definitely want to do that first before the VR, and it almost definitely won't, but it'd be neat if like the Resident Evil VR modes came to PC, man. I played a few hours of 7 in VR, and I really enjoyed it, but I don't think I could go back to my old PSVR with the 480p lenses it has. Arizona Sunshine did not look very good, I'm not gonna lie. The original game was kind of a prolific VR title in the early days, but it has definitely aged, not to put down like what the folks who made that game were able to accomplish at the time. This trailer just didn't do a whole lot to convince me that the second one's going to be very good. It was clearly all pre-animated and not very well either. Every single movement, especially with the hands, looked very stiff. It makes me think that there probably isn't a gameplay-ready demo out there yet, so they put this together to announce that it's just in the works. I'm hoping for the best because it was a VR original IP, if you want to call it that, and I just want like VR as a technology and software to do well overall, so fingers crossed that we'll see some more that turn my thoughts around, but I'm not super elated by this current trailer. That Synapse game looks very cool aesthetically at the very least. I love bright ass colors, especially when it feels like I'm actually looking at them. In general, even with flat screen games, it's very hard to tell how a game will play just from gameplay footage alone. It's even harder in VR games because there is just so much that cannot even be conveyed in a flat screen recording. Overall, I'm just excited for the future of VR, and it really seems like Sony is the one most actively pushing that and committing to making more games for that medium. And because I just like the idea of that stuff in general, there's a good chance I'll pick up a PSVR 2 to try some of these games, and also just probably where VR games are going to have their home for the near future. After that was Destiny 2, don't care. Concord is a game that got announced. There was a burger in the trailer. I have no idea what it's about. I think it's in space. And the last thing before the Spider-Man trailer that PlayStation announced was streaming to your mobile device from your PS5. And that's just kind of a letdown considering what Xbox is already offering. For a lot of Xbox services, including Game Pass, you don't need to have an Xbox to play the games on there anymore. You can obviously play the PC versions of those games where you're still downloading them, but there is game streaming to your mobile device that, from the people I know who have used it, actually works pretty well. And it doesn't need to be connected to your PC or your Xbox to function. It just streams it from a server. Obviously, that comes with its own latency issues, but having it as the only option to stream for the PS5 just seems like they're hitting below what Microsoft is offering. It reminds me of the response to the Game Pass, where they said that this was like their equivalent, and it was just so much less value. I understand Sony doesn't have the excess capital that Microsoft does from all its PC sales to just throw money at random things that may or may not pay off in the future, so they have to go a little more focused with their approach, make these single-player games as their main appeal, and then these services can kind of come second. Sony was smart enough to not make a streaming service and put all their IPs exclusively on that. I think they might be taking that same approach when it comes to their games libraries as well. But yeah, that's all the thoughts I have to share on the PlayStation conference. You guys should let me know what you're excited for in the comments. If you want like more videos like this as the next conferences come out in June, July, or whenever they may be, leave that in the comments and I'll try to get to it. If you want to give a video idea, hit that kwytebox at gmail.com. Something like advice, stories you got. It really can be anything. But yeah, piss off.